Welcome back on this Tuesday, Indiana Sports Beat Radio, coming to you from the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios. As always, some storms yesterday. Doesn't look great out there right now. I'm not sure what the weather is. Right before we left, I was talking about that quote from a few years ago when Alabama was about to take on the Sooners in the semifinals game back then, but it was Queenan Williams. He was probably playing in the NFL now.
Playing for the Jets, yeah.
Meet the Jets. But he was asked.
He could do that with every team. He could do that with the Nets too, right?
I know. Meet the Jets, Mets, Jets, and the Nets.
Any team that I follow, yeah.
Oh, here it is. This is just so funny. I've got to play this. So he was asked about a question about Kyler Murray. And I just love this.
Have you gone up against any quarterback that slightly resembles Kyler Murray?
No, I don't feel like I have going against a quarterback slightly resembling Kyler Murray, but I feel like Kyler Murray is not worried about.
What's that?
No, I'm good.
That is just one of my all-time favorites. I'm like, Nick Saban reached down as a ghost and put his hand around his throat and shut him up and made him cough. I'm good. No, I'm good. No one has the presence of mind. I'm like, how did he have the presence of mind? That because he was gone. He was already going. And boy, oh boy, you have no idea if I could do that where I might be in life. That's just funny. It's just one of my favorites, man. And speaking of an old Alabama person, I haven't gotten to talk to you about the Jimbo Fisher, Nick Saban flap up. And in the break, I was talking about, I don't think I've ever seen somebody shut up so quickly as Nick Saban did. The second Jimbo Fisher, buddy, jumped up. And for those not familiar, Jimbo Fisher, former assistant to Nick Saban, as is many big-time coaches now, but the longtime coach at Florida State, now at Texas A&M. But Nick Saban, for whatever reason, of all people to call anybody out, decides to call out Texas A&M basically because they've got a jump on the NIL, probably bigger than anybody in the country. They've got a NIL bankroll put together that's over $25 million. That we know of, and most of that will be geared towards football. And he called him out for buying players, which is laughable considering most of us know that Alabama has not spent the last decade plus where they are on accolades. But Jimbo Fisher comes right out and said he knows where the bodies are buried and basically let Saban know that. And Saban shut up almost instantaneously, Mike.
Well, there was also the admonition by the SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey to both men to cool it.
Well, because they knew the entire SEC could be exposed.
Yeah, it was an entertaining episode to see that. Some people, there are a lot of people, younger people, mostly younger people than me in the business who like are anarchists about sports. Like the more anarchy they can see, the more they're entertained, more so than the games themselves. And I'm not one of those people. I'm entertained enough by the games, but that's one where I got amused because the whole enterprise of college football is so backward in the way they operate their competition more than anything. The sport itself is beautiful, and the structure of the sport is a train wreck. And this is one you can't blame on the NCAA because they basically have nothing to do with it. This is the way college football is run, and the way its championship is decided is a joke. So to have a little bit of a hornet's nest stirred up there within that joke, I think is great because eventually maybe it leads to some progress. If there's some competition among the coaches, real competition, maybe eventually it leads to some progress in the way the sport is contested.
I'm surprised, Kevin. These coaches know what's going on. The guys who aren't cheating before, they knew who was. And I'm surprised that over time they didn't finally just get together and say, I'm sick of it. Sick of the same big dogs getting away with it and speaking out in some fashion, some form. That never happened really until you call a guy out now. That's a whole different story. He's going to come running like Jimbo Fisher did. But other than that, they keep the code, man.
Yeah, that's what I think it is. I think it's a code. It's kind of similar to, they refer to the blue wall and police corruption.
You never know when you're going to end up on one of those staffs.
I think there's a code. I think there's a code among coaches. And you can go all the way back to Bear Bryant, right? Who is Bear Bryant's lead recruiter was Jackie Sherrill. And for the coaches, if you were a head coach, you always say, get the player. Don't tell me how you got the player, right? That was kind of the way it was framed. And you kind of had to make your bones as an assistant coach to get player before you were the head guy, and you did it. So, I think that's probably the way that the system works in football and in major college basketball as well. And there's a lot of plausible deniability to go around. And we've seen, certainly the FBI probe in college basketball. And now we've seen this bickering between Saban and Jimbo. And Jimbo worked under Saban, so Jimbo probably knows as well as anyone, right? How the sausage is made. So it's but now that we're in this NIL era, what did you see Ryan Day's comment on what it'll take to keep Ohio State afloat? He said 13 million.
Yeah, at a meeting. They've got, I mean, they're basically these programs, Mike, which we already knew this. Those programs already were like this. They basically have a budget that is bigger than most athletic departments. These schools, like football programs like Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, these 100,000 seat stadium schools, the Alabamas, all Clemson's, they're just money juggernauts. How much? I mean, what are they making? $6 million a game at Michigan with 110,000 people? They charge the media $55 for parking. They're making money on everything. I think if you breathe air inside the stadium, there's a surcharge. I mean, they make more money than anyone. I think they have a printer under the stadium where they just are printing it out. Which NIL, we'll see how much NIL helps Michigan because they'll have the money. They should be right back there. But anyway, I don't want to get off topic, what we were talking about.
Well, I will say that I'm not casting any aspersions against anyone, but a lot of the criticism of the arrival of name, image, and likeness, a lot of the gloom and doom stories, because it's got to be bad, right? It can't be good. It has to be bad. So a lot of the gloom and doom questions are, well, how won't this divert money away from the donations that were made to the institution, and how will they survive without it? And my first thought was, how do you know that there's been none of this monetary activity that you just didn't know about? I mean, we know that at some schools players have been bought. I'm not casting any aspersions against any particular school, but to think that no one was paying to get players is more than a bit naive. So now the people who were engaged in that activity don't have to do it underneath the table now. They can join these collectives if they wish, and that money winds up in the players' hands, and maybe it helps them get an extra quarterback or whatever. I don't think it necessarily. The idea that name, image, and likeness is going to ruin college sports is the most absurd construct that I think that we've seen developed, by fans on Twitter, or in some cases media personnel. Name, image, and likeness isn't going to hurt college sports at all. If anything, it's going to help. And we've seen that with players making wise choices to return, rather than just say, look, I mean, I've been doing this for 3 years and it doesn't look like I'm going to make any money here. So I'll just go make a little money wherever I can. Players don't have to do that now. So it's actually been a boon to the high profile sports at the very least. And maybe, hey, I was speaking with a guy who plays running back in an Ivy League school last week. I was speaking with him, and he said he has an NIL deal. So it's not just, it's not just the SEC, man. It's the Ivy League too.
It's everywhere. I mean, and we had a question earlier from Robert. He says regarding IU basketball, the longer term question, can they not only rise, they're starting to rise back to be to where fans want to see them, and it's not laid out there, but this is basically on the backs of NIL. Malik Renault is not here without NIL. Trace Jackson Davis probably doesn't come back without NIL.
I think that's true. I think in an earlier era of 3-4 years ago, I think Trace would have gone and probably gotten a two-way deal, and he'd have made, a two-way deal is a good salary, but it's not overwhelming. And he can do this, and then if he continues to improve as an offensive player, as we've discussed before, I mean, the first round is not out of the question for him. He just has to get there. He's certainly dynamic enough, but he's got to show he can play away from the basket, especially at the offensive end. And I think he'll show defensively that he'll be fine in space. So the question from Robert is, can they be elite? Can they sustain it? I mean, you have to be it before you can sustain it. I mean, you have to get there, and they got better this year and made the tournament and advanced at least into the round of 64. But to sustain, you have to arrive before you can worry about sustaining. I certainly believe that Indiana has the ability to sustain an elite program. It's one of the best supported programs in the Big Ten, and we've seen Michigan sustain high level. We've seen Michigan State sustain an NCAA tournament streak that goes on for decades. So absolutely Indiana can, but the first thing you have to do is get there, and getting there is a lot of the hardest part, because once you've shown you can do it, then players start to believe and want to be a part of it.
And the recruiting wins that they've gotten now is going to be a big push because that they landed a big time class. They hadn't quite done that. They've gotten good players, but they've not landed this big class. And now, so they're making a splash. They're going to go play Arizona. They're going to go play Kansas. They could potentially play Duke or North Carolina. Seriously, in the Big Ten ACC Challenge,
right?
Because that's they want those marquee games. And
you remember, Jim and Kevin, even when Indiana wasn't successful or was a level below the top of the Big Ten, they were still getting marquee games in that ACC Big Ten Challenge because their ratings have always been good. Indiana's
still a draw, man.
Yeah, Indiana's name resonates, and its fan base is passionate, and so you would see a lot of years when Indiana was maybe going to be the 6th or 7th place team in the Big Ten. Oh, they're playing Duke. Like, wow. Yeah. And it wasn't all, it was kind of tough on the poor Hoosiers to have to go down to Duke in certain circumstances or play Carolina. Now they rose up a couple of those times.
I made that drive during the Archie Miller era. That was tough.
And it happened during Tom's era too, as well. You remember they played at home. I think it was in 15 or 16. They played Carolina. I think it was 16. They played Carolina coming off the Final Four, the buzzer beater loss, and on the way to a championship, and beat them at Assembly Hall. But that, with a team that wasn't one of the best Indiana teams. So I don't have any doubt, like you said. I mean, they're going to play. I would suspect they'll play Carolina or Duke in that challenge, with the way the offseason has gone for the Big Ten. When the Michigan guys left school, Diabate and Caleb Houston, and they were expected to be maybe the best team in the conference next year, but they're gone. So It has the NBA draft process has not been super kind to Big Ten strength and depth, but it has been to Indiana with Trace coming back.
I think you guys talk about non-conference, and I find this interesting in my 3 years that I've covered the team because, I look and they've beaten FSU, right, in the Big Ten ACC, and they've had some decent non-conference wins. I think the bigger problem for Indiana sustaining success is have a winning record in your conference, have a winning record, be a top 4 team in the Big Ten perennially, because if you do that, you're going to be a perennial top 25 team. You're going to have a high seed in the NCAA tournament. And, that 20-game league schedule is a behemoth, but you have to sustain that. And, not have those slip-ups, not go to Penn State and lose at Penn State on the road. Take care of Rutgers at home on senior day. I think those are the things right now that's holding Indiana back. But it's been a tough league, and it is a tough league.
Right.
But if you want to be considered that, I don't think in my 3 years that I've covered the team, they've had a winning record in the conference yet. And yet, they made the NCAA tournament this year because the Big Ten was strong, and they had the late run in the Big Ten tournament that helped them. But that's where you've got to really, and I think Mike Woodson, to his credit, talked about winning the Big Ten. They didn't do it. And they had a nice run in the Big Ten tournament where, if Bohannon doesn't make that crazy shot against Iowa, in the Iowa game in the semifinal, maybe they make the Big Ten tournament finals. But I think that's where the focus has to be. And in terms of, you talk about sustaining sustain a season, do it in January and February. Don't have those lulls where you can have that really nice dominant season. And, maybe this year they have the talent to do it and the experience too, with Race Thompson and Trace and guys coming back that have been through it before.
Yeah, I think that they have one of the obstacles for them as they have tried to grow through this last several years is that the last 3 years in the Big Ten have been I've been at the Big Ten Network since 2010. They have been 3 of the 4 strongest years the league's had. Now in 13, when IU had Victor and Cody, and Michigan made the championship game with Trey Burke as their point guard, and Michigan State was terrific as well. There were more high-level teams in the league in 2013 than in any subsequent year into very top. But the depth of the league in 2021 and 22, it's just been really difficult to navigate. And I think that's one of the things that's held Indiana back and some other programs as well. Is just trying to get through those choppy waters. It's been really hard, and they haven't been able to stay on the right side of that. But this is an opportunity when, as I said, with Michigan losing players, Illinois losing Kofi Coburn, although they did restock pretty well with transfers, with so many different players, meeting the regular end of their careers as well. Rutgers lost several players in that way. So with Wisconsin, of course, losing Johnny Davis and some others. So the league looks like it's ready to be overtaken, so to speak. This is a huge opportunity for the Hoosiers, for them to move forward with what they have back, with what they're bringing in. This is a big opportunity for them, and if they don't take advantage of it, it will be. It will hurt them in the long run. This is a enormous year for Indiana basketball in the way that 13 was for Tom Crean's Hoosiers, and it kind of, although they had a great year, it kind of hurt them when they lost in the Sweet 16 to Syracuse in the way that they did. I think this is a big year for the Hoosiers for Mike Woodson's Hoosiers in the same way. Everything's set up for them to succeed, and if they succeed, it will have rewards that go beyond this season. And if they don't, it'll be even harder to get back in subsequent years.
I agree, but and I think that it is definitely it's already propelled Indiana in that space, and I think that they will remain there because the recruiting is at a level, and they had that engine going right at the right time, and it hit at the right time with the staff that they have. And Mike Woodson has to be able to walk around with his head up way high because he came into a situation where it was dire. I mean, the worst that the program had ever been. And 2 years later, he's got them listed as a favorite to win the conference by most people, as one of the favorites, I should say, to win the conference, including me. And I'm hard, and I don't hand that out. So, yeah, I agree. I just noticed Keon Brooks Jr. transferring to Washington from Kentucky, the former Indiana prospect from Fort Wayne. So, man, you talk about something that just never panned out. Nothing ever happened for him at Kentucky.
I saw Keon as a high school prospect at the Peach Jam and sat next to Cal actually as he watched him. And, I didn't see him as a Kentucky player, to be honest with you. I didn't think that I didn't think he was able to swim in those waters as rapidly as kind of Kentucky expects you to, and as a lot of times as rapidly as the players expect themselves to. I thought he was a player that was 3 years away from being a significant contributor. I mean, in his third year, I thought he would be, and he was. But to develop into the player he wants to be honest, he can't play at Kentucky because he needs more shots to become the pro prospect that he wants to be. He's got to get more shots.
Do you know how many 3-point shots he has made in his career at Kentucky?
I do not know the number on that.
Well, I wouldn't if I wasn't reading this, and I'm
right.
doing it only because I'm shocked. 18.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, but if you, and there's no chart on this, but if you had 12 to 16 foot shots, you could probably find it in an advanced analytics site somewhere, but 12 to 16, he's been really good. But to become the pro he needs to make 3-point shots, and he needs to be in a program where they can facilitate that. Kentucky can't do that because if he misses 2 in a row, they're in trouble, and all of a sudden, fans are yelling at Calipari because he lost in the semi or in the first round of the NCAA tournament. So this is a mutual parting in the very real sense. They really like him. I talked to Keon 2 weeks ago, and he had nothing but good things to say about his time at Kentucky. But I think the unspoken part of it was that to develop as a player, he needs to be more featured than they could afford. And he needs more work on his perimeter game. Now he's going to have to do that himself. I mean, right. He's the one that has to stretch it out.
That's the Trace Jackson Davis story all over
exactly. In a different way, because Trace has been an All-America player, even though he hasn't been a successful perimeter player. But it's the same concept. You have to spend this summer in the way that Ayo Dosunmu did in the summer of 2020. You have to spend this summer changing who you are as a player. And no one is responsible for that more than you are. And he's got the ability to do that. If you can make 16-foot shots, you can become a 20-foot shooter, just as guys who were 20-foot shooters in college become 23-foot shooters in the NBA. I mean, like Steph Curry was shooting from 25 when he was at Davidson, but there's only one of him. Everybody else has to add those extra 2 or 3 feet onto their game in order to be successful NBA players. So it's doable. You just have to do the work, and it's a lot of work.
It certainly is. Mike, I cannot thank you enough, man. I think I could sit here and go all day long. There's so much stuff to talk about right now with the LIV and golf. Dustin Johnson just resigned from the PGA, hopes to play in the U.S. Open, but he was paid $200 million just to go to this new tour. I don't know what Phil Mickelson got. Tiger reportedly turned down an offer in the high 9 figures, which means it's over $500 million, probably $750 million. He turned down, and I'm guessing where that number is, but it's somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion, which I'm going to go with $750 million. So he turned down $750 million just to come there. Not his winnings. He could have, and the winnings are probably going to be astronomical as well. But there's no way that they keep picking at the other guys. They don't have to, if they don't get the stars, but start picking at the guys that are right under them, then the PGA will be left with an all-star tour. And
but here's the thing, Jim. I mean, okay, so if they don't get the guys like the real players, the guys who are great players on the tour now, Brooks Koepka, guys like that, if they don't get them, like, you won't know it's any difference. Right. I mean, you could round up like the best amateur players in various country club type settings that win the state amateur and all that, and make them PGA Tour players, and you are not going to see the difference. I mean, you'll see like, they won't win. They won't beat Koepka, but it won't change the viewing experience for golf fans. So the key for the PGA is maintaining access. The PGA Tour is maintaining access to the major tournaments. Now you can get into the U.S. Open because it's an open tournament. So Dustin can get in there because the PGA Tour can't keep him out, but they can keep him out perhaps of the PGA. They can keep him out perhaps of the Masters. Those are the two that the PGA Tour can maybe try to construct a wall around. We'll see whether that happens or not.
Yeah, the one thing this is amazing to me is I don't think no other sports league in the history of sports has faced a competitor with the full resources to accomplish their goal like this LIV and PGA, because USFL, blah, blah, yada, all the other leagues that have all come and gone, no one has ever had the resources that this LIV does. I mean, it's basically monopoly money that they're playing with. And so, and I'm shocked that they haven't had more success. If it wasn't for the moral part of it, man, where would the PGA be right now?
Well, I'll be frank. I mean, I don't think that's it. I don't think it's the moral part of it. No,
really?
I don't. I don't think that's how golfers are wired. Professional golfers are wired. I think it's more the history of the tournaments, the history of the PGA Tour.
Yeah, but if they all leave, they can't keep them. If they were all go over there,
if they were all to leave, I think, Jim, I think professional golf would plummet in interest, and I think there's an understanding.
Well, the PGA would have to let them play both. That's the thing, and they would play in the major events. But yes, I agree. The rest of professional golf would plummet because who cares about the Sony Open that pays $2 million to the winner when you're playing in an event that could possibly pay $200 million.
No, the events aren't that lucrative. I mean, they have some guaranteed contracts for certain players that in order to try to act as a lure, but they are more lucrative generally than the PGA tournaments are, and more importantly, they don't have a cut. So the baseline for a week for a player is something like $150,000. So if you're in the tournament, you're making $150,000, and if you're in, like you said, I don't know, the Sony Open or whatever, you could make that, but you also could make basically zero. So that's the problem that the PGA has relative to that. But I think there's an understanding that if more players took the LIV money, that they would destroy what they've built. Hey, let me tell you, it may not be that lucrative. It may not be LIV lucrative, but it's a hell of a way to make a hell of a living. I mean, those guys make big bank. And I think there's an understanding that if you look at what happened with kart and IndyCar racing, when you had the split there, it's taken 2 decades to get it back. You don't think that can happen in the golf tour? And I think those players understand that.
This happened in professional rodeo even. I mean, only because I've, follow that world, do I know that, but it's the same thing. It doesn't even matter the sport. There's always going to be someone when you have like NASCAR is another example. You've got a family that runs that sport, the France family, which is highly unusual. But when you have a group that's running, and then you've got the other group, which is the drivers in that deal, boy, they take that show elsewhere, but they ban them same thing with rodeo. The Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association would ban the guys if they were go to these other events. So it's we'll see how it works out. But man, we've gone way long, and I apologize.
Let me say, when I talked about that split, there, the Indy racing split, there were no Saudis on either side. I'm not casting any aspersions there. I'm just saying that when they split, it took 20 years to get IndyCar back to where it is now, which is in a pretty good spot. Yes. It took a very, so that's what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about the split, not necessarily the actors on either side.
Right. No, I get it. And speaking of which, we'll talk about the Detroit Grand Prix next with Kevin. Will Power gets him a nice win. Mike Decourcy, what's up next for you with the sporting news?
I got done writing an article. I'm not sure when it's going to appear about drafting like the overlooked players. You look at the NBA Finals and you got Draymond Green and Grant Williams and Peyton Pritchard out there, and how do you find those guys? What do you look for to find the overlooked gem who somehow was not overlooked when he was a college superstar? That those guys have made a big difference in these NBA playoffs, and so talked a little bit about that relative to the NBA draft, which comes up next week.
Make sure you give him a follow if you don't already, which would be crazy, and go to the sporting news and be a subscriber. Great content. Are they the oldest remaining?
Yes. 1886, man.
Come on. I wasn't even thinking that, man. I was thinking.
Yeah. I mean, we were like 100 years old when Sports Illustrated came along, or not quite 100, maybe 70.
Were you an intern?
Yes, I was. Yes.
Kidding. I don't say that because he even seems like Mike is timeless. But 1886. Why the hell would anyone start a sports publication in 1886? It had to be
somebody had to cover baseball, man.
I was going to say, did it start in New York or Chicago?
St. Louis. St. Louis.
They had to cover the Cincinnati Red Stockings, right? That's what they were back then or something.
Yes.
Oh man.
Three Fingers Brown and Wee Willie Keeler, or
Put it on your docket. That's something we need to talk about next week for all these Cardinal fans that are on here. That's a great story in and of itself. Mike Decourcy from the Sporting News. Thank you, brother. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Kev.
You bet. Hey, we've got lots more coming up as Chronic Hoosier will join us. Brought to you by good friends at Southern Stone Restaurant, located in Patterson and Rogers in Bloomington, part of the WOW network. Make sure you go and sign up for your WOW Club card. It's a free app. Everything's free. It doesn't cost a thing. They'll send you bonuses and all kinds of things you can use. Just go to your Apple App Store or Google Play Store to do that and get signed up for the WOW Club. They have a multitude of things, and they are a proud sponsor of IU Athletics. So help those who help us and who help you. Back with Chronic Hoosier right after this.